I live in Mill Valley, California, which is a small town in Northern California. And we had a housing mandate from the state, like every other city did. And I could not imagine how the city was going to make the mandate because we were supposed to add 865 new residences. And we have a lot of issues here that are safety related and others, but mainly we don't have any buildable land. So we have a marsh and part of the bay on one side, which is a floodplain. And on the other side, we have a mountain with very steep lots. They're very small. So to add 865 units, you basically have to stay in the flat areas where the neighborhoods are. They've been completely built out for decades. So I was very surprised to see that the housing element was approved by the state as having that much space in it to add 865 units. 40% of those are market rate. What they did to achieve the housing element was to use all of our underutilized land, which the state is referring to as lands with businesses on them that would be worth more if the businesses were closed down and housing was built there. Unfortunately for us, this was so many of our businesses that we would lose our doctor's offices, we would lose restaurants, other markets, we would lose the veterinarians here, gas stations, and basically what you get down to is we would have only housing. There would be nothing left. Large problem that is not going to be solved by forcing, businesses out. We would lose all the jobs that were involved with that. And these are businesses that we as a community kept going through the pandemic. So there's a lot of, community spirit about this as well. Because the lots are so small here, each one of these businesses has been assigned a certain number of either market rate units or, below market rate units. So they would start at very low, maybe low, moderate. And there aren't enough units in each space to make it worthwhile for a developer to add anything that's below market rate. In my opinion, when I look at this, I just see failure coming down the road. And failure for us would mean losing the certified housing element and being subject to a lot of penalties, including builder's remedy, which would allow a builder to come in and basically ignore all of our zoning rules, add very tall structures where they don't belong, very dense, and we wouldn't really have much say over that. So anything we've achieved by having the certification will go away if, when we're reviewed, they find that it hasn't been built the way that they want it. And the other problem is, of course, that if we do build all this stuff, it will create such a mass of traffic and people and stress on our infrastructure that all of the buildings that are above this flat area have very little access if there's an evacuation. So what we would create is basically a city where there's just housing, a lot of people. There won't be any parking requirements on the new housing, so it would be on the street, very crowded. And then you'd have 14,000 people that would need to come down from a mountain in case of a fire emergency through that clog to get to just 2 areas of freeway that they have access to. And Mill Valley is not the only city in this position. Any city that's basically built out is going to have to rely on an underutilized space. And in cities that are larger, that means they have a shopping mall that's not being used, or an old strip mall or a theater that's shut down. But when you have a town that has none of those things, this is the situation that you're in. Every 8 years, the state gives housing mandates to every city in the state, and you have 8 years to fulfill those. And to do that, you have to create a housing element, which is a document that is basically a contract with the state that you will be able to cite and have developed that amount of housing. Problem is that housing elements in the past didn't have to accommodate more than a city could actually accommodate, and there wasn't a lot of pushback if they didn't. But this cycle is completely different. The numbers are enormous, and the punishments are enormous. There's been an enormous push inside of the state government to create whole agencies that are just basically punishing cities who aren't moving fast enough to rezone commercial spaces into residential, or taking residential areas and making them much higher density. The RHNA is the regional housing allocation, numbers allocation. When cities received those, there was a lot of pushback because they were so high. And the ones that knew that they couldn't accommodate that filed appeals, and statewide the appeals were all denied. And they were denied without comment, which is very frustrating because if you have ideas, you have cities with infrastructure that cannot be upgraded, like you have a sewage system that cannot handle any more people, you have roads that cannot be widened, you have roads that in our case were built by horses, for horses in the 1880s, you end up with a lot of serious problems. And even if you could do any kind of infrastructure upgrade, the state does not help pay for it. Every city in the state basically is having to deal with this. About a third of cities haven't received a certification for their housing element yet because of this. It leaves you open to all kinds of punishments, including lawsuits from the state, lawsuits from other entities. The thing that most cities are worried about right now is builder's remedy. Because in that time where you had a deadline and you didn't meet it and you don't have your certification yet, in between that time is the time that a developer could file any kind of like crazy project that's as big as they want, and you're supposed to be able to get it approved immediately. In an area like ours, someone putting in, let's say, a 20-story building would be completely out of character, and it's really something that we're really, really trying to avoid. So having this housing element is a very good thing when it's certified, but I am concerned that when our review comes up, they won't see enough progress at the state level, and we will be decertified and be back in the same situation. Well, I think that what the problem is with the housing is that instead of giving every city a number to deal with, they should be looking at where the jobs are, where the population actually is that needs housing, and then look in a more generalized area where those areas are that can absorb more infrastructure. Sanitary facilities, they have the ability to have streets that have transportation. We don't have any of that here, and it can't be provided because of the way that the city's set up. So if you can find areas, which you basically can, that have less expensive land to start with, so it reduces your costs, land that's larger, so you can put in a development that's reasonable in size, you would get more interest from developers in putting it together. You're not going to find that in these tiny towns with these kinds of, problems. And there is no lack of market rate housing in these areas. So to include a 40% increase with the other part of the RENA number, so 865 would be for Mill Valley, but 40% of that is reserved for market rate. There is no need for that. We have a ton of market rate housing. What we need is affordable housing for workforce housing, and the problem here is that low income is basically $99,000 to $149,000. So when you think about helping, someone who's really needing housing, most people are not making that much money. That when people think about who they would be helping, it's basically a situation that needs to be solved with actually considering how you want to solve this without creating a ton of market rate housing. And the reason it's not happening that way is because this involves a lot of profit. And that's, the state used to provide this type of housing. They had agencies for it between 1944 and 2012. And they did provide it. And now nobody's doing it because it doesn't make financial sense.
If you haven't checked out CaliforniaInsider.com, we highly recommend you do that now because we're going to have a lot of news and videos there. And on top of what we have there right now, we are building a really big platform to cover what's happening in California so you can be informed. We're going to have more shows, more videos from all aspects of life in California. Go to CaliforniaInsider.com and we'll see you there.